What's going on, guys? So I'm gonna start doing more videos on this channel, and I figured since I do my Halloween track every year with Kọja, I'll just do a whole chronology of the whole Kọja timeline, right? Because Kọja started during COVID, and then it just kind of grew into this whole like saga thing, and it's actually my favorite project. I just love the aesthetic of it, the slowness, the heaviness, the darkness of it. I just love it so much, right? So I'm gonna do a whole complete Kọja chronology timeline for you guys in preparation for this song that's coming out this year. That'll be pretty much the wrap up of the whole Kọja saga, right? So pretty much I released the first album, right? First album was called The End of Oblivion, right? Chronologically, that was actually the second album in the series. It would turn out to be the second album. I just released it first because it started with just a flood of Reapers, and then I was like, oh, well, maybe I should do another song. Okay, well, if I do another one, I might as well make a whole record out of it. So that became The End of Oblivion. You had Beginning of Power. Sorry, not Beginning of Power. That was the first album. You had To Bequeath Destruction. Then you had A Flood of Reapers, which was the very first track I ever wrote. Then you had As a Soul is Cleaved from the Body. Then you had Abyss, right? So that was chronologically the second album, but that was the first one I wrote. Because, at the time it just started as a single, then album. Then I was like, well, now I got to make a whole story out of it. So I kind of had to figure out where everything kind of happened. And then I was like, okay, well, this album will be this album will be this album will be this. So Flood of Reapers came out, turned to End of Oblivion. And so I was like, okay, well, I want to make 3 Kọja albums in 3 years, right? So I was like, okay, so this next one, what should it be? So I kind of figured like a story arc, sort of, kind of. So I decided this next album would be chronologically the first album, even though I released it second. So that album, of course, was Cover the World in Evil and Destroy It. So that one started off the Beginning of Power, then it had Corruption, then it had Sacrifice. And that one was a lot simpler. I went kind of more like a grungy, kind of Alice in Chainsy type approach with that one. It was only 2 or 3 riffs per song. There wasn't really too much singing in it. I decided to do like a little bit more narration, like talking kind of thing, since there wasn't any really busy instrumentals in there. So I was like, well, I can do kind of like make it more like a storybook narration, something like that, and just have really simple, like 2 or 3 easy riffs that I just go through. Nothing crazy, nothing complicated, not really any solos, nothing like that, and just tell that story, right? And then, okay, I was like, it's year 3, you gotta have the third album, so where do I go from here? So that became Omnipotent Survival. So you had Spirit Wilds, then you had Ensnared, then you had The Essence of Freedom, right? And so I'm just go through all those albums in chronological order, and I'm gonna also say where the singles are at in the chronology, right? So the singles, you got Shivering, which was one I released last year, and then you got Creation of the Reaper, which I released 2 years ago, and then this next one is going to be called An All-Consuming Thunder. That's going to be the one that's coming out this October. So I'm just going to go from the top down chronologically and show you everything goes, right? So Beginning of Power pretty much is about this character who's born in opulence, royalty, whatever you want to call it. I try to keep it vague, but this character is born in opulence. They want for nothing. They've never known despair, hunger, anything like that. They pretty much their life is pretty much perfect, right? And so when corruption happens, they go out into the world outside of their kingdom or whatever have you, and they see famine, they see hatred, they see poverty, they see starvation, they see all these things that they've never seen before, and it's jarring to them. It like kind of messes with their brain a little bit. It's traumatic to them because their whole perception of their world is like shattered because there's this whole world they never knew about, all this bad stuff happening that they were never ever aware of, right? So it kind of mentally breaks them down a little bit. And then you have Shivering. So Shivering gets inserted in there, and that's pretty much about them going crazy, kind of the effects of the corruption of what they saw. They go back into their golden palace or whatever, and it's still affecting them. They can't stop thinking about it. They're back in their normal environment. They're back where they're comfortable, but they're still scarred. It's still rattling around in their brain, right? So that's where Shivering comes in. Then you have Sacrifice, in which this person, pretty much going insane, tries to do this ritual, pretty much. The first words of the song are, begin the ritual, right? So they try to do this to make the whole world like their world, not the best way to go about it, of course, but to them, this is what they need to do. Like, they can't handle the fact that this world is like this, or theirs is like this, so everything has to be a certain way, the way they want it. They dictate the way every single person's life and lifestyle has to be. So that's what this is about. And then that's the first album, Cover the World, Leave and Destroy It. And then we get into creation of the Reaper, right? So pretty much what that is this ritual this person creates, or does, performs, creates, the Grim Reaper, creates death, and by extension creates, this whole plague, right? So this whole plague of just death and destruction and everything that existed outside of their world on like a different unprecedented scale, right? Which leads into a flood of reapers. So originally I wrote a flood of reapers and gave it that title because I wrote it during COVID, during lockdown, and I titled it a flood of reapers because there were so many people there were so many people dying at once that it was just like not one single reaper, just like a flood of reapers everywhere, just like killing people, reaping souls, all that kind of stuff. And the lyrics are, is it in you, is it in me, you can find our homes because of the disease, all that kind of stuff. So this is pretty much what that person's sacrifice, created, right? Like all these reapers coming down, killing people, all that kind of stuff, right? So that's a flood of reapers. And then we go into, as the soul is cleaved for the body. So this person, after they perform this ritual, they wake up like, in the modern day, and they see all this destruction happening and all this death happening, because I also wrote it as kind of I wouldn't necessarily call it an allegory, but about the importance of nature. Because if you look at all the Kọja artwork, it's all like trees and tree stumps and the grass and fields. Like the album art for End of Oblivion is literally just this nature path I used to walk down like every week. It's just like the trees, the dirt. It's all the pictures are nature based. The art for Cover the World, Evil and Destroy It has those like dead trees with the roots going down. It's all about nature and the consequences pretty much of what humanity is doing to nature, right? So this person wakes up and as a soul is cleaved from the body, and they're like souls getting reaped, right? Because they've traveled through time, look at all the stuff, the consequences of their actions, their arrogance, and all that kind of stuff, and their souls getting reaped, and they're going up like into the sky. They're ascending, and they're seeing like deforestation, and they're seeing like murder and thievery and like all these terrible things, and they're just pretty much being forced to witness what their actions have wrought on the planet. And then they go up and they keep going up, and in my mind they just go up off of Earth and then just keep going until they reach like the edge of the universe, and then they're in this black space, not necessarily limbo, but it's just like this black space, and that leads into abyss, which is them just in this space where there's no sensory input. Like I did a lot of research about sensory deprivation, like in the that Ben Affleck Daredevil movie where he's in a sensory deprivation tank. I looked up stuff like that. So they're pretty much just floating in this place. They can't feel, see, hear, taste, touch, or smell anything, and they're just there, right? They're just there alone with their thoughts, and that's it, right? And then that leads into an all-consuming thunder. So in an all-consuming thunder, see how I can say it to not really spoil it too much, but they're suddenly in this place, and there's this great storm approaching them, right? But it doesn't quite reach them, They're standing in this place, and there's like this amazing, just like crazy storm, and it's coming toward them, but it's not necessarily quite reaching them yet. You know what I mean? So that's pretty much what all-consuming thunder is about. It's just pretty much, I guess you could say, it's like the wave of emotions and everything coming at them, but it's not quite reaching them yet, right? And then that goes into, Spirit Wiles, which I made it kind of more a little bit cinematic. In Spirit Wiles, you hear me like falling down and hitting the ground, and then, essence of freedom, and ensnared, you hear like the vines snapping and people screaming, stuff like that. So in Spirit Wiles, after that storm is coming toward them, they start falling, right? So they fall down into this spirit forest, you know, which I got from like Legend of Korra season, I think 3 or 4, where like spirit lines come out and all that stuff. That's where I got that concept from. So they go down, they're wandering through this spirit forest. They don't know what's going on, don't know if they're in heaven or hell, whatever, right? So they're wandering through the spirit forest and it goes into ensnared. So ensnared is when they get strung up by their arms and legs and their back of their head splits open, right? And then their good deeds and then their bad deeds like spill out of them and take physical form. And then there's this audience of, you know, creatures and spirits around them looking to see who wins. And this is pretty much determined if the person goes to heaven or hell, right? So that's pretty much, you know, that. And then during the whole time, you know, when the person's head splits open, like they feel it, you know, when their good and their bad sides are like fighting each other, they feel all the pain and all the guilt, all the happiness, all the joy, all the sadness, all the anger, like all that stuff. They're just feeling everything. They're just going through it physically and emotionally, right? They're just getting like destroyed, you know, just with every emotion coming at them at once, right? And then you go into Essence of Freedom, which I got that title from the painting of the album art for Mirror Reaper by Bellwitch, because I thought that album art was great. It was called Essence of Freedom. I'm like, hey, I can name the album this song Essence of Freedom. So that's where I got the title from. And in the end, I was gonna originally have him go to heaven, but it's like that would have been kind of lame. So I'm like, in the end, you know, the bad sides win, and then they go to hell, pretty much. So that's gonna be pretty much the whole chronology of Kọja right there. You know, it's just cool. I really love it. You know, this ended up being my favorite project because, you know, the first album got a lot of emotions out of me that I was still dealing with, and it just became this amazing story. I love the slowness of it, even though when I was first writing Flood of Reapers, I hated it because I'm really into like death thrash and power metal, so I'm in like speed and all that everything. And I was like, man, I wrote the drums like, oh man, it's so slow, I hate this. And then I wrote the bass and I was like, oh man, it's so slow, I hate this. And then I finally got the guitar in there. I was like, okay, it's kind of starting to sound good. And then I was like, well, what vocal approach should I do? And then it just became this amazing thing. The Flood of Reapers probably has my favorite solo I've ever wrote, even though All Consuming Thunder's solo is definitely coming close, but it's my favorite project. It's actually my most listened to project. I remember when I was working at Guitar Center, when my associates had a Spotify playlist playing through the speakers and a Flood of Reapers came on, and I was like, yo, you got this song on your playlist? He's like, yeah, I love this song. And I was like, oh, that's so awesome. And then I was checking out a customer who was in another local band called Thunderclap. Go check them out. And she was like, this is you? And I was like, yeah. She's like, this is badass. I was like, oh. So it's just, I just love this project, man. It's just my favorite project. It's a great story. For some reason, every time I write a song or album, it just ends up being some kind of like long story type concept album for some reason. I don't know why, but it's just my favorite project. I love it so much. All Consuming Thunder is going to close it out. And then, you know, maybe we'll see what happens after that, you know. But I just want to give y'all a little bit. This isn't quite a deep dive because I can go into a lot more stuff concerning like why I wrote these things the way they are and the title and everything. It'll be a much longer video. If you guys want to, just let me know. But that's pretty much the whole Kọja chronology there. All Consuming Thunder is going to close it out, and it's going to be awesome. It's going to be a longer song, you know, kind of back like the original Kọja songs. I know of Creation of the Reaper and Shivering are shorter songs. This one's about 12.5 minutes. So we're going back to the original Kọja song length, you know, the original mood, you know, good artwork, good mix, you know, we're gonna go back to the original Kọja feel to close out this book of Kọja right here. So thank y'all for watching. If y'all like this video, like, comment, subscribe, and rock on.